Birthdays had always been my favorite excuse to bring my family together. No matter how busy life became, my parents insisted that birthdays were special. There would always be homemade food, too much dessert, embarrassing childhood stories, and endless laughter. It wasn't about expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. It was about sitting around one table, reminding ourselves that despite our busy lives, we were still a family. This year was no different, or so I thought. I had just turned 32, and by 6 o'clock everyone had arrived at the little Italian restaurant we'd been visiting for years. Dad was already joking with the waiter about ordering extra birthday calories, while Mom made sure everyone had enough bread and drinks. My older brother, Ethan, walked in 10 minutes late. "Traffic," he said with a grin as he took the empty chair beside me. I laughed. "You've blamed traffic for every family gathering since high school. And it's been true every single time." The whole table burst into laughter. For the next hour, everything felt perfectly normal. Dad entertained everyone with exaggerated stories from my childhood. Mom rolled her eyes when he reminded everyone how I once tried to climb onto our golden retriever because I wanted my own horse. "I was only 4, I protested. "You were very determined," Dad replied. Even Ethan, who normally spent family dinners glued to his phone answering work emails, looked completely relaxed. He laughed with our cousins, helped the waiter pass around dessert menus, and even offered to pay for everyone's coffee. Looking around the table, I realized how rare moments like these had become. Life had taken us in different directions. Jobs, marriage, children, responsibilities. Getting everyone together now required weeks of planning. As the dinner plates were cleared away, the conversation shifted toward everyday life. Mom casually mentioned something. "I really need to clean out my old apartment." Dad nodded. "You've been saying that for months." Mom smiled. "I know." After retiring, Mom had kept the apartment she'd lived in for years before she and Dad decided to spend almost all of their time together at our family home. She still visited the apartment every few weeks to make sure everything was fine, but it had mostly become a place filled with old memories and boxes she never found time to sort through. "One of these days we'll finally sell it," Dad said casually. Mom nodded. "Probably. I stopped by a couple of weeks ago, but honestly, I haven't stayed there in over a month." No one paid much attention to the comment. A few minutes later, the waiter arrived carrying a large chocolate birthday cake. The restaurant staff gathered around our table and began singing "Happy Birthday." I couldn't stop smiling. Everyone clapped as I blew out the candles. Phones came out. Pictures were taken. My aunt insisted we take another family photo because Uncle Mike had blinked during the first one. It was in the middle of all that laughter that everything changed. Mom slowly leaned toward Dad. Her voice was so quiet that she probably thought no one else could hear. But I did. "Since everyone's here." Dad leaned closer. "Have your son changed the locks at my apartment?" I frowned. Dad looked confused. "What?" "The apartment," Mom whispered again. "The locks have been sticking lately." Dad shrugged. "Then call a locksmith tomorrow." "I don't want to wait." She glanced toward Ethan. "He knows how to replace them." Dad looked at my brother. "Think you can?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Sure." Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a small ring of keys. "I've been meaning to ask you for weeks." She handed them across the table. "I'd really appreciate it." As Ethan took the keys, I noticed something strange. Mom looked uneasy. Not frightened. Just uncomfortable. Like someone trying to ignore a feeling they couldn't explain. Ethan noticed it too. "You okay, Mom?" She forced a small smile. "I probably worry too much." Dad chuckled. "That's your mother's favorite hobby." Everyone laughed. Everyone except Ethan. He continued staring at the keys in his hand. "You're sure nothing happened over there?" Mom hesitated. "No." Another pause. She looked embarrassed. "What kind of feeling?" I asked. She sighed. "The last time I visited, something looked different." "Different how?" Ethan asked. "I honestly don't know." The curtains were open. Dad smiled. So? I always close them before leaving. Maybe you forgot. Maybe. She nodded slowly. But then I noticed the coffee mug. What about it? It wasn't where I remembered leaving it. Dad smiled patiently. Honey, memory plays tricks on all of us. I know. She looked down at the table. You're probably right. The conversation slowly drifted back to lighter topics. Vacation plans. Holiday dinners. Work. Life. No one seemed worried anymore. No one except Ethan. He slipped the apartment keys into his jacket pocket. I'll go now. I blinked. Right now. It's only 20 minutes away. Dad looked surprised. It can wait until tomorrow. Ethan shook his head. If the locks are already giving her trouble, I'd rather fix them tonight. Mom looked relieved. Thank you. He stood up. I'll be back in about an hour. I watched him walk out of the restaurant. For some reason I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the worried look on Mom's face. Maybe it was how quickly Ethan had volunteered. Or maybe it was because family dinners weren't supposed to end with someone quietly walking away into the night. The celebration continued. We opened gifts. Shared more cake. Talked about old memories. But every few minutes, someone glanced toward the restaurant entrance. Dad checked his watch. He's taking longer than I expected. Traffic, I joked. This time, no one laughed. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Mom's smile slowly disappeared. She reached for her phone. I'll call him. Before she could dial, the restaurant door opened. Ethan walked inside. For a second, I didn't recognize him. His face had turned completely white. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. His hands were shaking so badly that the apartment keys nearly slipped onto the floor. Every conversation at our table stopped. Dad stood immediately. Ethan. He didn't answer. He simply stared at Mom. His lips moved but no words came out. For several agonizing seconds, the entire restaurant seemed to disappear around us. Finally, he found his voice, barely louder than a whisper. Mom. She slowly stood from her chair. What happened? Ethan swallowed hard. His eyes were filled with a fear I'd never seen before. Then he spoke 4 words that turned my birthday into the beginning of a nightmare. Mom. Someone's living there. For a moment no one moved. The laughter that had filled the restaurant only minutes earlier vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Mom stared at Ethan, searching his face for an explanation. What do you mean? Someone's living there, she asked, her voice. Ethan swallowed hard before answering. There are lights on. Mom frowned. That's impossible. I thought maybe you'd gone back there without telling us. I haven't. You're sure? She nodded immediately. I haven't stepped inside that apartment in weeks. Dad slowly stood. Did you actually see someone? Ethan ran a trembling hand through his hair. I didn't at first. The rest of us gathered around him. I parked outside the building and noticed the living room lights were on. I figured maybe Mom had forgotten to switch them off. He paused. But then I got closer. His eyes dropped toward the floor. I heard music. What kind of music? I asked. I don't know, some old jazz station. Mom's face turned pale. I never leave the radio on. I know. He took another shaky breath. I unlocked the apartment door. He hesitated, but it was already unlocked. Dad frowned. What? The deadbolt wasn't locked. Mom looked stunned. I always lock it. That's exactly why I got nervous. A chill ran through my body. I pushed the door open just a little. I called out, hello? No one answered. So I stepped inside. The restaurant had become eerily quiet around us. Even people at nearby tables had stopped talking. The apartment looked. He paused. Like someone was living there. Mom's breathing became heavier. What do you mean? The kitchen counters were spotless. They weren't when I left. The dishes had been washed. I left dishes in the sink. The trash had been emptied. Mom slowly shook her head. No. There were fresh groceries on the counter. Dad stared at him. Groceries? Bread. Milk. Fruit. Things that definitely weren't there before. I felt my stomach tighten. There was even a vase filled with fresh flowers. Mom covered her mouth. I don't even own a vase. Dad grabbed his car keys. We're going. Within minutes, our entire family climbed into 3 cars and drove across town. The 20-minute drive felt like an hour. Nobody spoke. Every one of us imagined the same terrifying possibility. Someone had broken into Mom's apartment. Someone had been secretly living there. As we entered the apartment complex, Ethan pointed toward the 2nd floor. The lights are still on. Sure enough, warm yellow light glowed behind the curtains. Mom grabbed Dad's arm. I don't understand. Dad turned toward us. No one goes inside until the police arrive. I already called them, Ethan admitted. They said they're only a few minutes away. Dad nodded. Good. 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot. After listening to Ethan's story, the officers carefully walked upstairs. One officer knocked loudly. Police department. Silence. He knocked again. This is the police. Open the door. A few seconds later. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Standing there wasn't the dangerous stranger any of us had imagined. Instead, an elderly woman with silver hair and tired eyes looked at the officers with confusion. She couldn't have been older than 75. She wore a faded gray sweater over a pale blue blouse and held a warm mug with both hands. I'm sorry, she said softly. Is something wrong? The officers exchanged puzzled looks. Mom slowly stepped forward. This is my apartment. The elderly woman's eyes widened. Tears immediately filled them. Oh no. She lowered her head. I didn't know you were coming back. One officer spoke gently. Ma'am, do you know the owner? The woman nodded. Yes. Many years ago. Mom continued staring at her. Then suddenly, recognition flashed across her face. Margaret. The elderly woman slowly looked up. You remember me? Mom gasped. Oh my goodness. Before anyone could react, Mom rushed forward and hugged her tightly. Both women began crying. I looked at Dad. He looked just as confused as I felt. Finally, Mom turned toward us. 20 years ago. She wiped away tears. Margaret lived across the hall from me. She was trying to escape an abusive husband. Margaret quietly nodded. She had nowhere to go. Mom continued. I let her stay in this apartment whenever she was afraid he'd find her. I looked around the room. The spare key. Mom nodded. I gave her one. Margaret's voice trembled. You told me. If I was ever truly desperate again, this apartment would always be my safe place. Mom closed her eyes. I remember. My husband passed away last year, Margaret whispered. A few months later, I lost my home. I didn't know where else to go. I still had the key. I came here hoping no one would mind if I stayed. Just for a little while. She looked around the apartment. I cleaned everything. I bought groceries. I wanted to leave before anyone found out. I never meant to frighten anyone. The room fell completely silent. All the fear that had followed us here slowly turned into heartbreak. Dad finally stepped forward. You should have called us. Margaret gave him a sad smile. I wasn't sure your family would even remember me. Mom gently held both of Margaret's hands. I could never forget someone whose life became part of mine. She turned toward the police officers. Years earlier, she'd given Margaret permission to use the apartment if she was ever in danger again. After Mom confirmed she wanted Margaret to stay temporarily, the officers documented the situation, reminded everyone to update the arrangement legally if it became long-term, and then quietly left. As the apartment door closed behind them, Mom smiled warmly at Margaret. You're not spending another night wondering where you'll sleep. Dad nodded. This family doesn't forget its promises. Margaret burst into tears. An hour later, instead of changing the locks, we sat together around Mom's small kitchen table. We cut the birthday cake we'd brought from the restaurant. For the first time that night, everyone smiled. It wasn't the ending any of us had expected. We had come searching for a dangerous intruder. Instead, we found a forgotten promise. A promise that had survived 20 years. As I looked around the table, watching Margaret laugh with my parents like she'd never been gone, I realized something I'll never forget. Strong locks can protect a house, but only kindness can make it a home.